The next speaker is well known to most of us here, but for the benefit of others who know him less well, here is a brief bio of our noted author and historian, Jon Guttman. Jon was born in Flushing, New York. He was raised in Palisades on the Hudson River. He holds a master's degree in European history from the State University of New York at Albany. Jon is a 20-year veteran of the 29th Infantry Division. His service took him to Normandy in 1994 for the 50th anniversary of D-Day. He also did peacekeeping duty in Bosnia and Herzegovina in 2001 and 2002. He retired as a Master Sergeant in 2005. Jon presently serves as Research Director of the Weider History Group. Weider publishes an array of military history magazines and books including Aviation History, MHQ, America's Civil War and Civil War Times, Vietnam and Wild West. Jon has written numerous articles and monographs and books on naval and aviation history, but his passion remains military aviation of the Great War. Jon's presentation today is entitled Triplace Aces of World War I. Please welcome Jon Guttman.
Usually we're going to deviate from one of the favorite chestnuts of World War I, the dashing fighter ace, with all due respect to Monsieur Nunez's cousin. He's a rather extreme example of the kind of person you think of when you think of a fighter ace. But World War I bred a variety of aircraft, and it also bred an interesting variety of aces. And what I'm going to focus on are people who you would not even think of as fighter pilots or crewmen necessarily, but who managed to produce aces anyway in 3-seat aircraft that officially were meant to be reconnaissance planes, and how that circumstance came about. From the beginning in World War I, as the reconnaissance plane developed, different approaches to reconnaissance were also taken, especially as the enemy tried to have a say in who did what. And there were different specialized types. There were what the French called corps d'armée. Well, that was a general reference to any reconnaissance plane. But as you know, there were some like the RE-8 that were puttering over the front, doing close support for the troops, and the Halberstadt CL-4 would be a typical example of that also. And then there were the others who were doing long-range reconnaissance, like the Samson 2A2 and the Rumpler C4. Deep penetration strategic reconnaissance, what the U.S. Army Air Service called Army reconnaissance, as opposed to Corps reconnaissance, which was up closer in. And for the job at hand, especially when it came to long-range reconnaissance, well, how do you handle that? And some went for speed, like the Italian SVA-5. And the Rumpler went for altitude to try to avoid interception. And then you had something like the Sikorsky Ilya Muromets, which went in deep with 4 engines and a number of crewmen manning machine guns, and if necessary, fought its way back. And for a final parting shot would drop some bombs as it came back over the front. Well, the French developed a plane that, along similar lines and philosophy to the Ilya Muromets, and that's what we're going to focus on here. In 1915, Caudron, well, I should qualify that. Caudron went two different directions. One were the lattice-tailed aircraft produced by Gaston Caudron, who was a little obsessed with the Wright brothers and even continued to produce such aircraft even though they were tractor planes. And his brother René, who built more conventional planes with fuselages. It was René Caudron who came out with the R4 in 1915 with a couple of 150 horsepower Spano-Suiza engines and a pilot just behind the upper wing, an observer in the nose manning a machine gun, and a rear gunner behind the pilot manning another machine gun. And once again, the idea was to go in deep, regardless of altitude, and if the enemy got in the way, you just fight your way back. And that was the philosophy behind the R4, which later, when the French developed a system like that, was known as the R4A3. A for corps d'armée and 3 for the number of people sitting in it. The plane shown here is during its testing at Issy-les-Moulineaux, where at the Caudron Assembly Works. And in practice, the R4 was a bit of a handful to fly. It had a tendency to go into spins if you weren't careful. And it was also rather slow and underpowered. It could only do about 75 miles per hour with those Hispano 4A engines. But nevertheless, it was handed out to various units. Most of the time, they would supplement standard two-seater reconnaissance aircraft, including Caudron G4s, made by Gaston Caudron. And if the job called for a long-range reconnaissance, then they would send them. But there was one unit that in early 1916 was fully equipped with the Caudron R4s, and that was C-46. And that would become an exceptional unit in more ways than one. It was formed on March 23, 1915, and attached to the 6th Armée in the Aisne sector. It had 6 Caudron G3s and 4 G4s on strength at the end of February 1916. And by the time of March 13, 1916, when Capitaine Didier Lecourt-Grandmaison replaced Capitaine Joseph Legardeur as commander, it had only lost 1 man in combat and 3 men wounded. Comparatively serene state of affairs that would change when Lecourt-Grandmaison, shown here in 1917, took over. Born in Nantes on May 18, 1889, Lecourt-Grandmaison was a devout Catholic, a 1907 Saint-Cyr graduate. He had served in the 26th Régiment de Dragons until dissatisfaction with the cavalry's role turned him to aviation. He earned his brevet on May 15, 1915, served in C-47 until reassigned to C-46, and although devoted to carrying out the long-range recon missions assigned his crews, he soon started displaying a belligerent attitude toward any enemy planes that should cross his path. Sometime after, in the spring of 16, as he encountered an LVG and promptly attacked the plane, leaving it to his observer, Lieutenant Jules César Campion, and his rear gunner, Soldat Léon Vitalis, to shoot it down, which they did. It was credited to all 3 crewmen in accordance with French practice. In Vitalis's case, it was his second. He had been born in Londève on February 15th, 1890. His full name was Marie-Gaston Fullerant Léon Vitalis, and he had served in the 7th Régiment de Cuirassiers until discharged before the war for medical reasons that seem also to have stood in the way of his getting into the air service, until sheer persistence overcame the objections and he joined up as an aerial gunner. After gunnery training at Caudron, he was assigned to N67, which at that time still had some two-seater Nieuports, and during one mission with Sergeant Robert de Marolles, he shared the destruction of a Fokker E-3 north of Hill 304 on April 28, 1916. Soon afterward, N67 replaced the last of its two-seaters with a strict complement of Bebe scouts. Vitalis asked for a transfer to three-seaters, and he got it. The next success for R46, as it was renamed once it fully equipped with the R4s, involves Sous-Lieutenant Jean Lost, Sous-Lieutenant Pierre Barboux, and Soldat Louis Martin, who on crossing the lines ran into 5 German aircraft, one of which was a twin-engine plane, probably an AEG G4, or at that time more likely a G2 or G3, near Saint-Christ on July 27th. In the ensuing combat, Martin used up several ammunition drums, and when they ran out, he fought on with a carbine until the two-engine plane went down, killing Gefreiter Georg Schultz and Lieutenant Hans Zeulen at Estrée-en-Chaussée. The Caudron returned in such a pitiable state that it had to be taken back to the rear. This skirmish started 2 more Triplace aces on their way. Jean-Augustin Paul-Joseph Lost, this is one of the R4s that were assigned to R46, and I believe I have identified the crew on this plane as Le Coeur Maison as the pilot, Maréchal des Logis Léon Vitalis as the observer, and Adjutant Achille Justin Rousseau as the gunner. He was assigned to that, shown in photos of the plane in other pictures. And this is Lost. Born in Toulon, September 2nd, 1893, obtained his civil pilot's license on November 7th, 1913, qualified as a seaplane pilot on March 23rd, 1914, did a brief stint in the infantry, then got back into military aviation on January 2nd, 1915, got his pilot's brevet as a military man on April 19th, assigned to C-56, wounded, promoted to sergeant on July 19th, commissioned as sous-lieutenant on April 17th, and on June 20th he was transferred to R46. Pierre Barboux recalled in a 1970 interview, we had a machine gunner called Martin who fired admirably. A simple soldier mechanic who asked to fly. Louis-Honoré Martin was born in Paris on October 18, 1896. He was the son of a customs agent. At the time he enlisted, the French were not accepting anyone under 18, but he falsely claimed to be 1 year older than he was to enter aviation as a mechanic. He joined C-56 as a soldat deuxième classe in late 1915, and on August 11th, he became first mechanic, was assigned to Adjutant André Delorme, and later to Lost. When Lost was reassigned to R46 on July 18, 1916, Martin, reclassified as a gunner, went over with him. On August 22nd, 2 more Germans fell to the R4 crews. But one of the Frenchmen, Sergeant Pierre Stoyer, was mortally wounded. On September 6th, Le Corps Grand Maison, Sous-Lieutenant Pierre Arthur and Maréchal de Logis Vitalis drove down a Fokker. 2 days later, lost Barbeau and Martin in concert with a second R4 crewed by Sergeant Etienne Crombray, Brigadier Achille Rousseau, and Brigadier Georges Cadeau, battled 6 enemy planes and were jointly credited with one of them. Combray's observer, Achille, well, let's get on with some of these. That's Martin. And that's Vitalis. Rousseau was born in Dijon on August 29, 1889. He was the son of a railway employee. After completing a 2-year hitch in the 15th Régiment de Chasseurs à Cheval in 1910, he opened a butcher's shop in Paris, but rejoined his old regiment when the war broke out. While on leave, he married Marcel Frémaux on February 15, 1915, but when Soldat First Class Rousseau's health deteriorated, the French military did what they so often did with men who were too sick to serve in the infantry. They transferred him to aviation. On January 3rd, 1916, he went in, and after gunnery training at Cazaux, he was reassigned to N23 and subsequently to R46. On October 20th, Le Corps Grand Maison with Sous-Lieutenant Gaston Laboussière and Vitalis shared in downing an LVG with another Caudron team, Caporal Paul Rivière, Sous-Lieutenant Eugène Barbier, and Sergeant Louis Giraud. During a reconnaissance on November 1st, went down to 150 meters altitude where his gunners, Capitaine Guy de Piet de Montcabrier and Martin, shot an enemy plane down in flames over its own hangar. It wasn't confirmed, but as the Caudron fought its way through a gauntlet of enemy fighters, its crew was credited with bringing down 2 of their pursuers. Anti-aircraft fire finally caused the riddled plane to crash land at Allied lines, injuring Martin. On November 10th, Le Corps Grand Maison, Vitalis, and Rousseau brought down a Roland east of Bar-le. On the 16th, lost Vitalis and Rousseau downed an Albatross at Brie. On November 23rd, Barbier, with Rousseau and Adjutant Robert Mazarin, took on 3 Germans and shot down an Aviatic. Between the enemy planes and anti-aircraft fire, the Caudron returned looking like a sieve. Rousseau was wounded in the arm. Lost Barbeau and Martin claimed a German near Bar-le on December 27th, and on January 26th, the same team accounted for an Aviatic north of Bapaume. This, along with 2 more successes on January 29th, brought R-46's overall tally to 22 enemy planes shot down, for the loss of 4 men dead. That's better than a good many single-seat fighter squadrons, wouldn't you agree? It was then withdrawn to replace its Caudrons with a somewhat improved triplace, the Latour 1. Latour actually put out a variety of aircraft, noted all for their back-staggered wings. Some of them had Hispano-Suiza engines, some Lorraine Dietrich. The number usually depended on the engine it used. It was only slightly faster, but apparently a more satisfactory arrangement in other ways. Well, I'll get back to this Latour later. When it returned to the front, it was Let 46, as it was now called, was assigned to Group de Combat 12, the famous Stork group, serving alongside the Nieuports and Spads of Escadrille N3, 26, 73, and 103. Le Caudron and his crews had managed to make R-46 something worthy of France's top fighter group. But although their Latours may have been a bit of an improvement, when the group was committed to General Robert Nivelle's April 1917 Aisne campaign, it would find that the Germans had been improving too, quite a bit. And the cost of glory would be a lot heavier, because this time the Germans would be using the Albatros D3, and they were at the top of their game. Let 46 got its first experience with these new Jagdstaffeln on April 8th, when its 3 remaining R4s did a patrol and were attacked by Albatros D3s of Jasta 19. Caporal Maurice Daminet, Caporal Paul Rivière, and Maréchal de Logis, Célestin Theron were credited with 1 over Orgeval, and Lieutenant Marcel Bloch, Sergeant Léonard Jussin, and Sergeant Alfred Boyer got another over Aguilcourt. There was a third that was forced to land at Oranville, but was not credited, to Sergeant Marcel Gendreneau, Lieutenant René Wilmes, and Adjutant Pierre de Kuipers. Well, the reality of the fight was that while some of its planes may have force-landed, Jasta 19 suffered no casualties, while crediting a Caudron to Oberleutnant Erich Hahn. That would have been Gendreneau's plane, which actually limped in with Wilmes dead and Kuipers wounded. Jussin and Theron were also wounded in the melee. The pilot of one of the planes, Lieutenant Robert Bloch, was a Jewish chap from Paris who apparently had taken Le Caudron Maison's philosophy to heart, and this was his first, and as it would turn out, only victory, although he was to prove an important character in R-46's future. Le Caudron Maison himself, never one to lead from behind a desk, finally joined the ranks of his squadron aces on April 14th, when he, Vitalis, and Rousseau destroyed an Albatros in flames south of Graon. This time they had a match. They killed Lieutenant Otto Weigel of Jasta 14. On the 17th, the unit scored another victory, but it was marred by Jussin being wounded a second time. Daminet with aspirant Pierre Bruel and Georges Cadeau at the guns scored on the 26th, but on the 29th, Latour L number 90 was lost with all 3 crewmen. Lieutenant Jules Campion, Maréchal de Logis Marcel Lamy, and Caporal Bousquier, killed by Lieutenant Walter Berning of Jasta 19. But the most jarring loss came on May 10th, when Le Caudron Maison's Letord was beset by Albatros D5s of Jasta 15 and was shot down north of Berry-au-Bac by Lieutenant Heinrich Guntermann, the commander of the Staffel. Killed were Le Caudron Maison and Caporal Joseph Crozet, although the wounded gunner, Sergeant Boyer, miraculously survived. Shaken though R-46 was by the leader who'd been its heart and soul, Bloch took over and continued to uphold Le Caudron Maison's aggressive legacy. In June, the unit was detached from GC-12 and reassigned to the 3rd Armée sector. By the end of the year, its score stood at 28, but its dead had risen to 15. On February 10th, Let 46 reverted to its previous designation of R-46 because it received 10 new Caudron R.11 A3s. Sleeker, more powerful, faster developments of the R-4, armed with as many as 5 machine guns and now propelled by 220 horsepower Hispano-Suiza 8B engines. In the meantime, though, we might look at a few other aces who flew the triplaces. And a case in point is this Caudron, which is attached to Escadrille C-11. This unit was led by Capitaine Joseph Guillaumin, a career officer who was also an aggressive reconnaissance man. While flying Caudron G4s, he scored 2 victories. And while flying a Letord 1A3, like this one, on May 11th, 1917, he, with Sous-Lieutenant Guy de Lubersac and Sergeant Descamps, shot down an enemy plane over Sapinul. On October 11th, Guillaumin was withdrawn, at which point he had 1,400 flying hours, 100 combats, 11 Army citations, and had been made an officier de la Légion d'honneur. But the French had bigger plans for him. They would put him in charge of Escort 12, which was a combination of several bombing groups, which he would command, and as usual, he would very often fly missions with them. Flying Breguet 14 bombers, he would add 4 more to his score, and would also continue to serve in World War II. And he was one of the few people, one of the few generals to earn the Croix de Guerre in combat in World War II as well. He would be one of the great officers of the French Air Service. There would be another case of an ace who scored a couple of victories in one of these two-seaters, and his case is one of the most bizarre among the French. A fellow born in Belgium who became a French citizen by the name of Adolph Alois de Gozang Marie Hubert Ghislain Dubois d'Esch. One of the oldest French aces. And who'd, you could have written an adventure book about him before the war began. Born on March 17, 1874, he was the son of a Walloon nobility whose genealogy dated at least to the 15th century. But he was a willful kid, and his father, Count Adrien Dubois d'Esch, opposed his wish to become an engineer, and then sought to arrange a proper marriage for him. He ran away from home. He went to the Belgian Congo. On September 4th, 1904, he enlisted in the French Foreign Legion. He learned German from his many Teutonic comrades in arms and acquired French citizenship by the time he mustered out. He then went to France, where he fell in love with and married Constance Catasson, with whom he settled in Paris and took up an engineering career in 1914. When war broke out, he enlisted in the infantry and fought at the Marne, the Argonne, and Vauquois. Wounded on April 4th, 1915, he transferred to the Aéronautique Militaire on July 15th, served as a mechanic at the Aviation School, and then decided to become a gunner, training for that at Cazaux. On April 6, 1916, Caporal Dubois d'Esch was assigned to F-71. Based at Commercy near Saint-Mihiel, it was equipped with Farman F-40s at the time and was engaged in mostly in réglage and reconnaissance duties for the 8th Army around Verdun. This is a Letord assigned to F-71, and this is Dubois d'Esch, who at this point was about 43 years old and just warming up. On May 22nd, he was on a photo mission over Varennes area with Lieutenant Pierre Theodore Weiss as his pilot, when he reported, "For the first time I had the joy to see bush." He then said, there were three. My pilot, in maneuvering, found a means of tricking them by feigning flight. Soon one of the albatross, giving into the trap, abandoned his comrades to give chase to us. That was what we were waiting for. Once we saw he was sufficiently from the others, in a brusque dive we turned into him, and at 50 meters I had the pleasure to enter a short combat and see my adversary crash to earth. After Verdun, the escadrille moved several times, moving up to Saint-Menehould on 23rd January 1917 to support the Nivelle offensive at Chemin des Dames. In April, it got 7 Samson 10 SM-1s, a type that anyone who heard my last lecture are familiar with. They suffered 4 wounded that month, and on May 14th, they lost one entirely with its crew to Lieutenant Hermann Pfeiffer of Jasta 9. Finally, they replaced them with Sopwith 1A2s, and Dubois-Desch was in one with Brigadier Jacques Fontaine as his pilot on June 3rd when they spotted 5 German fighters above them. The first Boche dived and shot at 30 meters, continued his vertiginous dive right into the ground, Dubois-Desch reported. The second followed the same route and nicely hit, likewise crashed into a forest. The third German attacked only to be hit and forced to land. The remaining 2 retired. Fontaine and Dubois-Desch were credited with one of them. In July, Escadrille 71 got AR-1s, and on July 24th, 4 of them got into a scrap with some Albatros from Jasta 9. All of them were shot up. In the case of Caporal Henri Beatty and Caporal Dubois-Desch, their plane ended up crashing in French lines. Beatty died of his injuries soon after. Dubois-Desch was miraculously unhurt, and they were credited with shooting down 2 of their opponents. Jasta 9 recorded the death of Lieutenant Oscar Denke at Pont-à-Chien. At this point, Dubois-Desch was promoted to sergeant, and later that summer the unit received its Latours. On September 22nd, Brigadier Fontaine was flying one of the triplaces over Seney-en-Dormois, with Dubois-Desch up front taking 20 photos, and Lieutenant Marcel Meunier manning the rear gunner's pit when 3 Albatros dived on them. The first soon arrived at a good distance, and at between 30 and 40 meters, 3 or 4 bullets sent him to the ground in flames, Dubois-Desch wrote. The other Germans retired. Moving on to Vouziers, the Letord shot up 2 troop trains before returning to find a large German 2-seater directing artillery on French positions. Descending, Fontaine engaged the plane and Dubois-Desch sent it crashing into German lines. He was cited for his 5th and 6th victories and awarded the Médaille Militaire. He was, as I said, age 43, and he wanted more. At this point, he requested a waiver on the French limit of 30 as the maximum age, so that he could take pilot training. On December 16, 1917, it was granted. He went to Cazaux and Istres, got his brevet on June 25, 1918, but he was injured in a crash before he was assigned on October 3rd. In the interwar years, he worked in civil aviation. In World War II, he was residing in his wife's hometown of Saint-Quay-Portrieux, where his fluency in German led to his working for the Nazi occupation forces as an interpreter and an administrator, until he got a knock on his door from the Gestapo. It seems that he had a suspicious way of being in their vicinity shortly before they were to arrest known French resistance members who wouldn't be there when they came. He had been secretly working with the resistance all along. He was imprisoned in a fortress, defied all manner of interrogation, and I think you can imagine what that was like, until 1944 when he was liberated. He served as a municipal councilor thereafter and died on October 7th, 1958, at the age of 84. Getting back to R-46, this is the Caudron R.11 that it was equipped with. And while officially a reconnaissance plane, this is how it looked in the original French circulars, this was literally a flying fortress. There was even a gun firing downward as an option. It could carry as many as 5 of them. This is actually a post-war machine. It does have the trident emblem of R-46, but this was at this point 1920. It was in the 204th Escadrille of the 3rd Régiment de Bombardement at Neustadt with the occupation forces. Bloch was still in charge, and in 1918, his unit and several others forming fully equipped with the R-11s had, as a result of the impression that Le Coeur Grand Maison's philosophy had made with the R-4s and the Latours, they were finding a new assignment that had nothing to do with reconnaissance. They were assigned to escort Breguet 14 bombers on their bombing missions, providing them literally a flying fortress to, well, serve pretty much as a Schutzstaffel, to draw the enemy fighters away, to engage them, and generally protect the bombers. During this period, this photo shows that R-46 acquired some foreign help. They were American observers from units that had yet to receive their aircraft, and in order to give them some hands-on practice at the front, these men were assigned to French units. They are 2nd Lieutenant Paul Penfield, 2nd Lieutenant, they only call him Pop Smith, and he soon left the unit due to illness, although the diary of one of them, Valentine Berger, implies that his illness had a lot to do with the bottle. The one in the middle is Sergeant Glenn Sitterly, a volunteer of the Lafayette Flying Corps who was only about 19 years old when he joined up. Next, 2nd Lieutenant Valentine J. Berger from New Jersey, 2nd Lieutenant Alexander T. Greer, and 2nd Lieutenant Horace A. Lake. All of them got to fly under the command of, often with Bloch as their pilot. It's believed that Sitterly was regularly assigned number 14, which is being prepared for takeoff here. Sitterly was also the pilot when this plane crashed on July 19th, 1918. Greer and Penfield are shown, showing off its vertical stabilizer number. And this is Berger, who on August 13th, 1918, was involved in a dogfight in which another volunteer with them, Soldat Walter McKernis, was shot down and killed. In fact, they lost 2 planes in this fight. But his plane was credited with a Fokker D-7. And according to him, number 13 was his regularly assigned plane with Caporal Émile Plomion and Maréchal de Logis Louis Leroy de Pressal. According to German records, there's a good chance that the Germany shot down was Lieutenant Hans Pipper, commander of Jasta 19, and a recipient of the Ordre pour le Mérite with 20 victories. Nevertheless, although it ended up with 40 victories by the end of the war, R-46 produced no more aces, although Berger would go on to come close when he joined the 90th Aero Squadron, flying Samson 2A2s, was credited with 3 more victories and earned the Distinguished Flying Cross. But there were several other units that were also assigned to escort the bombers, and one of them was Escort R.11, which had a triplace theme as its emblem, in this case a 3-headed hydra. Its principal ace, in fact it's probably its only ace, was Alexandre Jean-Marie Buisson, born September 17, 1886 at Asnières-sur-Seine, the son of Jean-Marie Buisson and Romanian-born Catița Lupescu. He enlisted in the Army on May 31st, 1905, served in the 5th Régiment des Chasseurs d'Afrique in Algeria and Morocco until 1908. He was an agronomy engineer in Paris when the war broke out. Then he joined the 8th Régiment de Hussards before transferring to aviation on June 3rd, 1916. After training at Caudron and Pau, Maréchal de Logis Buisson was assigned to F-29, and on October 12, 1918, he participated in the epic Oberndorf raid, during which he and his pilot, Sergeant Marius Despères, were credited with bringing down a Fokker E-3. He subsequently served in SOP 123 and C-21, and then on July 20th, when R-240 was assigned, he was assigned to it. On August 29th was Sergeant Lucien Carteron as his pilot and Sergeant A. Gagne as the front gunner. He was credited with an enemy fighter. On October 1st, he was promoted to adjutant. Next day, he was up in Carteron's Caudron with Soldat A. Raymond as the rear gunner when they shot down a Fokker D-7 in flames over Senide. His last 2 successes with Sergeant J. Dufour as pilot and the newly promoted Raymond, a sergeant, was described in his Médaille Militaire citation. On 3rd November 1918, at the end of a protection mission, noticing an enemy convoy, he descended along the German lines to strafe them. Attacked by a patrol of 10 planes, he sustained a severe and unequal fight, permitting his pilot to disengage and succeeded in downing 2 of his adversaries. One in flames, the other crashed to earth. He survived the war with the Croix de Guerre, returned to civilian endeavors, but died in 1939. There are some sources that credit a second R-240 gunner, Sergeant André Colin, with 5 victories, but I've only been able to document 4 of them. It's possible that, like Buisson, we may be able to trace him to an earlier one. As for the men of R-46, another one who would score elsewhere was Rousseau, who after coming out of the hospital became a pilot, serving, but previously served with N-79 and then N-88. He was still a gunner in one of 2 SPAD 11s when they attacked an enemy 2-seater and were joined by a SPAD 7. Between them, they shot it down, killing Lieutenants Erich Pohl and Otto Heilmann of Fliegerabteilung A-255S. Rousseau shared that as his 6th victory with his pilot, Sergeant Jean Vidal, the other air crew, and with the scout pilot, Sous-Lieutenant Raoul Lufberry of SPA 124, who within the hour would score another for his 16th and last victory. Rousseau then left SPA 88. in 1918, was a gunnery instructor, then demobilized and returned to working in the Abattoir de la Villette in Paris. In 1928, he injured his hand while butchering a bull, and the amputation of his hand and later his arm were both too late to stop the gangrene that would ultimately claim his life on October 23rd. Léon Vitalis was made a Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. He founded the Association Nationale des Arts, and on July 14, 1935, he was made a Commandeur de la Légion d'honneur. He died in 1941. Lost rose to the grade of Grand Officier de la Légion d'honneur before his death in 1960. These are some of the aspects of the French aces you don't hear that much about. This is another Caudron of R.11, which arrived late in the war and was not credited with anything, but shows off a rather interesting emblem anyway, a black bull on a white and red field. And the Americans got interested in the R.11's possibilities. Two of them were acquired and assigned to the 96th Aero Squadron with the possibility of escorting their Breguets, but the war ended before they saw any action. Another interesting aspect of these twin-engined aircraft is that the concept of using twin-engine aircraft as escort fighters or general-purpose fighters would be revived in the 1930s and would result in the creation of a number of aircraft, such as the Polish PZL Wilk, the Fokker G1, and the Messerschmitt Me-110, and arguably might also be extended to interceptors, such as the Bell Y1FM, F1M, and the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, but that's when we get into a whole other story. Any questions?